The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Blackwell Industries headquarters. Damien Blackwell stood before the panoramic windows of his corner office, watching the city below move like clockwork. Everything in his world operated with precision, efficiency, and cold calculation. At 34, he had tripled his father's fortune, expanded the company into 12 countries, and earned a reputation as the most ruthless businessman in the industry. People called him brilliant. They also called him heartless. He didn't disagree with either assessment. Benjamin Cross, the family attorney, entered without knocking. The elderly man carried a leather portfolio that seemed to weigh more than it should. Damien didn't turn from the window, his reflection showing no emotion in the glass. "The reading of your father's will contains a surprise," Benjamin began, his voice careful. "William Blackwell added a codicil 6 months before his death. My father has been dead for 2 years. Why am I only hearing about this now?" Damien's tone was flat, conversational, as if discussing stock prices rather than family matters. "The codicil was time-locked. It activates on your 34th birthday, which was yesterday." Benjamin opened the portfolio, extracting a document. "Your father left you controlling interest in the company and the entirety of his personal fortune, which amounts to approximately $400 million. However, there is a condition." Damien finally turned, his dark eyes unreadable. "Continue." "You must marry Rosalie Hayes within 45 days. If you refuse, or if the marriage dissolves before 3 years, the inheritance goes to charity. The company shares transferred to the board." For the first time in years, Damien felt something crack in his carefully constructed composure. Not anger, not surprise, just the faint recognition that his father had managed one final manipulation from beyond the grave. "Who is Rosalie Hayes?" "She's 26 years old, lives in Meadowbrook Village, about 3 hours from here. She works at her family's bakery and helps care for her grandmother, Margaret Hayes. Your father and Margaret were childhood friends before his family moved to the city. They maintained a correspondence throughout their lives. Your father believed their families should be united." Sentimental nonsense. Perhaps, but legally binding nonetheless. Damien returned to his desk, his mind already analyzing options, calculating probabilities. "What's the Hayes family's financial situation?" "Precarious. The bakery is failing. Medical bills for Margaret's heart condition have depleted their savings. The bank is threatening foreclosure on their property." "Then we have leverage." Damien pulled out his phone. "Arrange a meeting, offer $500,000 for her cooperation, draw up a contract specifying separate residences within my estate, minimal public appearances, and a clean dissolution after 3 years. She receives a final settlement of $3 million. "Sir, this is a marriage, not a merger." "Everything is a transaction, Benjamin. Find out what she wants. Everyone wants something." 3 days later, a black town car arrived in Meadowbrook Village, looking absurdly out of place among the pickup trucks and modest sedans. Rosalie was decorating cupcakes in the bakery window when she noticed Benjamin Cross entering. He wore a suit that probably cost more than her car. "Miss Hayes, I represent the Blackwell family. I need to discuss an urgent matter with you and your grandmother." In the small apartment above the bakery, Margaret Hayes sat in her worn armchair, oxygen tubes in her nose, while Rosalie held her trembling hand. Benjamin explained the situation with practiced professionalism, watching the young woman's face shift from confusion to disbelief to something resembling anger. "This is insane," Rosalie said, her voice shaking. "You want me to marry a complete stranger because some old man wrote it in his will?" "I understand your reaction. However, Mr. Blackwell is prepared to be extremely generous. Your family's debts would be cleared immediately. Your grandmother would receive the best medical care available. After 3 years, you would receive a settlement that would secure your future indefinitely. No, Rosalie stood, her cheeks flushed. I'm not livestock to be bought and sold. Rosalie, honey, Margaret spoke softly, her voice weak but firm. Listen to what he's saying. Grandma, they're trying to buy me. They're trying to give you a future. Margaret reached for her granddaughter's hand. Baby, I'm dying. The doctors said 6 months, maybe less. This bakery is gone. You've sacrificed everything to take care of me, and I can't bear watching you throw away your life for a lost cause. You're not a lost cause. I don't care about money. I know you don't. That's why I'm asking you to think practically for once. 3 years, Rosalie. 3 years of security, and then you're free with enough money to do anything you want. Open that restaurant you've dreamed about. Travel. Live. Please, baby, do this for both of us.
Rosalie looked at her grandmother, the woman who raised her after her parents died in a car accident, who taught her to bake, to be strong, to find joy in small things. Now that strong woman was asking her to do the impossible. That night, Rosalie walked through the village one last time, past the bakery her great-grandfather had built, past the church where she'd been baptized, past the small cemetery where her parents rested. She thought about dreams, about sacrifice, about the difference between selling yourself and saving the person you loved most. She called Benjamin Cross at midnight. I'll do it, but tell Mr. Blackwell that I'm not going to be invisible. I'm not going to pretend I don't exist. I'll convey your message. The wedding took place in a stark courthouse with no guests except Benjamin and Helena, the manor housekeeper. Rosalie wore a cream dress she'd found at a discount store. Damien wore black, his expression as cold as winter stone. The judge read the vows mechanically. Damien responded with a crisp, "I do," that sounded like he was confirming a delivery. Rosalie's voice caught, but she managed to whisper her agreement. When the judge pronounced them married, there was no kiss, no embrace. Damien simply checked his watch. Helena will show you to your rooms. I have work to finish. He walked away without looking back, leaving Rosalie standing in the courthouse hallway, officially married and utterly alone. The drive to Blackwell Manor took 30 minutes through increasingly affluent neighborhoods. The estate appeared behind iron gates, all modern architecture and cold glass, beautiful in the way a museum is beautiful, untouchable, lifeless. Helena greeted her at the entrance with a kind eyes and a warm smile. "Welcome, Mrs. Blackwell. Let me show you to your quarters. Please, just call me Rosalie. Mrs. Blackwell sounds like someone else entirely." "You'll adjust, dear. We all do eventually." But as Rosalie followed Helena through endless hallways filled with expensive art and empty spaces, she wondered if adjustment was just another word for giving up. And she promised herself that no matter how much money surrounded her, she would never surrender who she was. Her room was beautiful, decorated in soft blues and creams, with a massive bed and windows overlooking gardens that looked professionally maintained, but somehow sterile. Damien's quarters were in the opposite wing. They were married people living like strangers in a hotel. That first night, Rosalie lay awake in the enormous bed listening to the silence. Back home, she could hear crickets, the occasional car passing, her grandmother's soft snoring through the thin walls. Here, there was nothing, just expensive silence in a beautiful prison. She got up and stood at the window, looking at the manicured grounds below. Somewhere in this mansion was a man who had agreed to marry her but couldn't spare 5 minutes for conversation. A man so afraid of feeling anything that he'd turned himself into a machine. Rosalie made a decision then. She would honor this contract, stay for 3 years as promised, but she wouldn't become a ghost. She wouldn't let this cold place freeze her heart. She would live, she would be herself. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find a way to prove that some things couldn't be bought or controlled. In his office, 3 floors above, Damien stared at financial reports without reading them. He kept seeing her face in the courthouse, the way her voice had trembled saying her vows, the hurt in her eyes when he walked away. He told himself it didn't matter. This was business, necessary, temporary. But somewhere beneath his carefully constructed walls, something whispered that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Not in marrying her, but in believing he could keep his distance from someone who looked at him like he was still capable of being human. Part 2. Breaking Through. The first week passed like a dream Rosalie couldn't wake from. She wandered through rooms filled with furniture no one sat on, past art no one looked at, through hallways that echoed with emptiness. Damien left for work before dawn and returned after midnight. They existed in the same space without ever truly occupying it together. But Rosalie refused to disappear. On the 8th morning, she found Helena in the kitchen preparing breakfast. "Can I help?" Helena looked surprised. "Mrs. Blackwell, you don't need to work." "I know, but my hands feel useless here. Back home, I baked every morning. The smell of bread rising was how I knew the day was starting right." Helena's expression softened. "Well, I won't turn down help. Can you chop vegetables?" They worked side by side, and Rosalie felt almost normal again. She told Helena about the bakery, about her grandmother's famous cinnamon rolls, about the regular customers who felt like family. "You miss it," Helena observed gently. "I miss feeling like I mattered." Over the following days, Rosalie began transforming small spaces. She brought plants into the sterile living room. She opened curtains that had been closed for years. She started baking in the mornings, filling the mansion with scents of vanilla and cinnamon. The staff, initially distant, began gravitating towards the warmth she created. She discovered the garden behind the mansion, overgrown and neglected. Something sparked in her chest. Here was something she could fix, something she could bring back to life. She found tools in the shed and began working. The physical labor felt like medicine. She pulled weeds, trimmed branches, cleared pathways. Her hands got dirty, her clothes got stained, and she felt more alive than she had in weeks.
Damien noticed from his office window. He was on a conference call about quarterly projections when movement caught his eye. Rosalie knelt in the dirt, completely absorbed in her work. She looked so out of place in his controlled world, so vibrant and real. It irritated him. It also fascinated him in ways he didn't want to examine. Weeks turned into a month. Rosalie established routines. She had breakfast with the staff, learning their stories. Marcus, the groundskeeper, was saving money to visit his daughter in Seattle. Elena, the cook, was taking online classes in graphic design. Helena's husband had passed 5 years ago, and she still wore his wedding ring. Rosalie listened. She cared. And slowly, imperceptibly, the mansion began to feel less like a mausoleum. Damien observed these changes from a distance. He heard laughter echoing from the kitchen. He saw fresh flowers appearing in vases. The staff moved with less tension, smiled more freely. One evening, he came home earlier than usual and found Rosalie reading aloud in the living room. The entire staff sat around her, completely absorbed. She was reading a classic novel, her voice bringing the characters to life with warmth and expression. Damien stood in the doorway, unnoticed, listening. Her voice was nothing like the clipped efficiency of business meetings. It was alive, full of emotion, painting pictures with words. When she finished the chapter, everyone applauded. "Same time tomorrow?" Elena asked, hopefully. "Absolutely. We need to find out what happens next." They noticed Damien then. The room fell silent, the staff suddenly remembering their employer's presence. "Mr. Blackwell," Helena said quickly, standing. "We were just—" "It's fine," Damien interrupted, his voice neutral.
Continue. But the moment was broken. The staff dispersed, leaving Rosalie alone with her book. She looked at him, defiant and uncertain at once. I wasn't disrupting their work. They'd finished their duties. I didn't say you were. Then why are you looking at me like I broke some unwritten rule? How am I looking at you? Like a puzzle you can't solve. Damien almost smiled. Almost. Perhaps you are. He turned to leave, then paused. The garden looks better. It was the first personal thing he'd said to her since the wedding. That night, a violent thunderstorm rolled across the estate. Lightning split the sky and thunder shook the windows. Rosalie had always hated storms, a fear that dated back to childhood when a tornado destroyed half her village. She tried to sleep, but gave up around midnight. She went downstairs to make tea, her hands trembling as she filled the kettle. Can't sleep? She jumped, nearly dropping the kettle. Damien stood in the kitchen doorway wearing dark sleep pants and a simple shirt. It was the most casual she'd ever seen him. He looked almost human. "The storm," she admitted. "It reminds me of the tornado that hit Meadowbrook when I was 8. We hid in the cellar for hours." He nodded, moving to the cabinet. "Chamomile or peppermint?" "You know where the tea is?" "I do live here." Could have fooled me. He made 2 cups of chamomile, and they sat at the kitchen island as the storm raged outside. Neither spoke for several moments. "Why do you do it?" Damien asked finally. "Do what?" "Care about the staff, read to them, transform the garden. You're not obligated to do any of it." Rosalie looked at him, really looked, and saw something behind those dark eyes. Not warmth exactly, but curiosity, a crack in his armor. "Because kindness doesn't require obligation," she said simply. "I care because they're people, not because someone's paying me to care. That's the difference between us, Damien. You think everything has a price. And you think some things are priceless? I know they are." He was quiet for a long moment. "What do you think of me, honestly?" "I think you're terrified." "Of what?" "Of feeling anything at all. Because if you let yourself feel, you might remember what you lost. And that pain seems bigger than any success you could build." Damien's jaw tightened. He stood abruptly. "You don't know me." "You're right. I don't. But I'd like to." "This is a business arrangement, Rosalie. Nothing more." "Is that what you tell yourself every time you watch me from your office window? Every time you notice the flowers or hear the laughter?" He froze. She had seen him watching.
"Good night, Rosalie." But as he walked away, his walls felt thinner than before, and that terrified him more than any hostile takeover ever had. 2 days later, Rosalie collapsed in the garden. She'd been feeling dizzy all morning, but pushed through, determined to finish planting the new rose bushes. Helena found her unconscious among the flowers and immediately called Damien. He left a board meeting mid-presentation, something he'd never done in his career. He arrived home to find Rosalie in her bed, feverish and delirious. The doctor diagnosed severe heat exhaustion, complicated by low blood sugar. "She needs rest, fluids, and monitoring," the doctor instructed. "No physical exertion for at least a week." Damien dismissed the doctor and pulled a chair beside her bed. For the first time since his childhood, he felt genuine fear, raw, unconditional fear. He stayed all night, changing cool cloths on her forehead, making sure she drank water, monitoring her temperature. Around 3 in the morning, she stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Damien." "I'm here. You're okay. You just overdid it in the heat." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't cause trouble. You scared me." The admission hung in the air between them, more significant than any contract they'd signed. She reached for his hand, and he let her take it, marveling at how small and fragile it felt. "Stay," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." She fell back asleep holding his hand, and Damien sat there watching her breathe, feeling something crack open inside his chest. Something he'd sealed away 20 years ago when his father taught him that emotions were weaknesses and business required a heart made of ice. But this woman was melting that ice, one small act of kindness at a time. And the terrifying part was that he didn't want her to stop. Over the next week, as Rosalie recovered, something shifted between them. Damien worked from home, checking on her regularly. They had meals together. He told her about his father's death, about the pressure of running the company, about the loneliness of success without meaning. She told him about losing her parents, about raising herself with her grandmother's help, about dreams of opening her own restaurant someday. They talked like people, not like parties to a contract. One evening, as they sat in the newly restored garden, watching fireflies dance in the twilight, Damien reached for her hand. "I need to tell you something. Before I met you, I had Benjamin draw up divorce papers. I was planning to end this the moment the 3 years were up. Clean break, generous settlement, no complications." Rosalie's breath caught. "Had?" "Had," he confirmed. "I burned them yesterday. Because somewhere between your terrible habit of caring too much and your insistence on seeing me more than a bank account, I fell in love with you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Damien!" "I don't know how to do this perfectly. I'll probably mess it up constantly, but I want to try. I want real mornings and real conversations and a real marriage, not a contract, a partnership. If you'll have me. I fell in love with you weeks ago, even when I was angry at you, even when I didn't want to. I couldn't help it." He kissed her then, gentle and uncertain, like a man learning a language he'd forgotten how to speak. They stayed in the garden as stars emerged, two people who'd started as strangers bound by paper, now choosing each other freely. Over the following months, they built something real together. Rosalie opened her restaurant in the city, serving recipes passed down from her grandmother. Damien learned to leave work at reasonable hours, to prioritize moments over meetings. They brought Margaret to live with them in her last months, and Damien held Rosalie as she grieved, learning that sharing pain was just as important as sharing joy. A year later, they renewed their vows in a real ceremony, with flowers, music, and everyone who mattered to them. This time, when the officiant pronounced them married, Damien kissed his wife like she was the most precious thing in his world. Because she was. They filled the mansion with foster children, giving love to kids who needed it most. The house that had been a museum became a home full of laughter, chaos, and warmth. And in the garden they'd restored together, Damien and Rosalie found what no contract could ever guarantee: a love built on choice, nurtured by patience, and grown in the good soil of two hearts learning to beat as one. Sometimes the best love stories don't start with love at all. They start with two broken people brave enough to stay when everything says run, wise enough to change when everything says stay the same, and strong enough to choose each other every single day.